All right. Happy Thursday, everyone. Welcome back to our NoCodeOps Live Community Show. It has been a minute, and I'm so happy to see all the friends in the chat already. That's incredible. I'm so pumped. Thank you so much for showing up, for coming. I know that our guest today is very special. She's definitely attracting a crowd here, and so I can't wait to introduce her to you. But if this is your first time here, we're an international community for professional operators that leverage the power of no-code tools like Airtable, Zapier, and whatnot. And we get together every Thursday offering these free live streams for our community. We're also active 24/7 in our Discord. And yeah, so come and join us. We're quite good fun. But if you're here today, tell me where you're joining us from. And if you're part of the community, if you're not part of the community, let me know and I'll shoot you an invite. I can see Eric, Stephen, Chris, Isaac, Marcus. Amazing, amazing. Great to see everyone here. And so without further ado, let me get our very special speaker here today. And let's give a round of applause or a big welcome to Lola. Hi, Lola. How are you today?
Hello. Hello. I'm good. I'm good. Happy to be here.
It's so great to have you here. And I know that we started a couple minutes late because we were just like deep in conversations. I love chatting to you. And for the audience here that doesn't know, I've had the pleasure and honor of meeting Lola in real life in Atlanta. And she's just as incredible as she is online. So if you do have a chance, go and have a coffee with Lola because you won't regret it.
Definitely.
And I was also saying that I'm really happy to finally have a woman as a guest speaker here at No Code Ops. I'm so happy for that. Lola, before we dive into your topic today, which is going to be really interesting, because I would say, and we were chatting about this in the backstage, is a little bit more advanced to what we've been covering in the past, especially with Zapier. So we will be looking into how to build a custom app with it. And so I'll let you introduce your topic properly. But before we even go there, I would love to hear more about your background and how did you even get started with no code?
Yes, absolutely. The big question. So my journey with no code actually started on the wanting to create a startup side. I feel like there are a lot of no code folks who are like trying to build a startup. So for me, I had been working on a plant-based meal planning app part-time for quite some time, and I was at the same time also in a program for learning iOS development. Randomly happened upon a meetup for makers, and somebody was like, oh, like, do you know about this thing called no code? It was like 2019. They're like, I was like, no code, but don't you see my plans for my plant-based meal planning app? Like, I can't do no code, but ultimately discovered it more, learned more about it. Sort of long story short, there is the plant-based meal planning app didn't really go much of anywhere, but learned the skills to build apps. And Lunch Pail Labs, which is the studio that I run, then launched primarily building MVPs for founders. Years into that journey, then got to work more closely with companies on integrations, particularly companies who wanted to connect their tools for their users so that their users could have an easier time. Kind of an example would be if I'm a software company, I have a lot of users on Zapier. I want to build a Zapier app so that Zapier users can easily use my software. But that's kind of the journey. Kind of went from completely no code. Now I do a lot of code, but really love talking about the topic and think Zapier apps are really interesting as well. So.
Yeah, that's quite an impressive journey as well. And what do you think about this? Obviously, we have this big community of operations professionals who now use no code because it's kind of entering the workspace even more. And what do you think about that particular role of a no code operator? Like, is it new? Is it something that has always been there, but now it's got a name? I know there's like citizen developers and whatnot. So I would love to hear like from your perspective as well.
Yeah, I think I feel like the names have changed over time. I think citizen developers might be like more of like the legacy name, but I am just so like excited. I think no code has a really strong use case within operations. In my previous life, before I was doing anything with like no code or trying to do a startup or like running a business, I actually worked in operations like at a company, and The amount of times I would have to like beg some like developer team to like build something so that my team doesn't have to do this like ridiculous workflow was just too many to count. And had I known about no code ops back then, I think my life would have been so much simpler. So definitely think we'll probably see more of that as it comes on, and absolutely a value add. Not even to mention like how it can help people scale their time. So Lunch Pail Labs is a solo business. I think if I didn't even use no code internally just for managing operations, that would not be possible in any regard. So yeah, I think it can help all around. So
Yeah, absolutely, and absolutely agree with you. We're definitely seeing an increase in requests and demand in the market for it, and some people that are not even aware that a no-code operator is what they're becoming. They're just given the tools. They're like, oh, hey, our new CMS needs to be, or CRM needs to be on Airtable, and then they have to go and pick up the tool and learn it, and automatically become a no-code operator without even realizing that's what they're called somewhere in the world. So that's quite cool. Enough of no code, the background and all that. Which if anyone here has got any other questions they would like to ask, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll get to them later. But yeah, Lola, tell us about our topic today. What are we going to learn from you?
Yeah, so today we're going to dive into building Zapier apps. They're Zapier's form of integrations, and so use case especially. So I use Zapier apps a lot when working with companies. Obviously, if you have like a software company, you want to plug your API into Zapier, you'd build a Zapier app. But there are a lot of internal like use cases too, like as operators that you can have for Zapier apps. If there's like an API or a tool that you commonly use within your flows that's not on Zapier yet, you don't have to wait for that company to build an integration with Zapier. You can build one yourself, even build integrations to Zapier, like internal tools as well. And I think another thing that I'll note too before we dive into actual building, but Zapier, lots of different ways that you can extend with code. You can use Zapier webhooks. You can use the code step with Zapier. Where Zapier apps are going to have like the most benefit is when you find that you're connecting with a service in many different processes. So when it's not just like a one-off, oh, I want to get this, but where you might use it for different workflows. So that's what we're going to go over.
Amazing. And just as what we were saying at the very beginning, this is slightly an advanced use case for any Zapier users, especially beginner ones. So, but do follow along, because I was telling Lola I have a crazy amount of newsletters that I receive in my inbox every day, and Lola's newsletter is the one newsletter that I always open because I know it comes packed with great insights and just her teaching style. But you're gonna see in a moment. So Lola, should I pull your screen?
Yeah, you can pull in my screen and we can get started.
Alrighty, here we go.
Awesome. So everyone's seeing my screen?
Yeah. Do you have any? Do you have a chance to make it slightly bigger for us, or?
Oh yeah.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, so today we're actually gonna build our Zapier app with Zapier's platform command line interface. So we're going to be in VS Code. We're going to be in the code, but we'll talk through all of it together. But wanted to briefly note that there are two different ways for building Zapier apps. You can use Zapier's platform UI. So here I am on my demo account in Zapier's platform. It's possible to start a Zapier integration by clicking the create integration button and then filling out this form, and then it'll take you kind of step by step. But I find that the command line tools are a bit quicker. So we'll go through that. So with that said,
And I can see Eric in the chat. He says, I, not a developer, finally managed to build my first custom Zapier app a couple of years ago, and I feel like I've leveled up. Absolutely, absolutely. Kudos to you, Eric. Well done.
Nice. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I mean, my background is, I haven't been developing for forever and a day. So it's absolutely something that you can do, especially if you've already been playing in the Zapier platform and making making workflows. So I'm just going to dive right in. We're going to go ahead and make a Zapier app to illustrate the process. I'll talk more about the app we'll build, but to begin, let's just go ahead and do our first step. So you can use any sort of coding environment that you desire. Our Zapier app is going to be a Node application. Node, it's an environment for running JavaScript on the server side. So don't be intimidated by that term. But like the first thing we're going to do, starting from scratch using Zapier's platform command line interface, is make sure that we're on Node version 18. So first command we use here is Node v18. That's the version that Zapier's platform currently works with, which definitely subject to change. So you will want to make sure that you at least reference their prerequisites and docs before starting that, just to make sure you're on the right version. And then we're gonna install Zapier's tool. So even though we're coding, Zapier provides a ton of shortcuts for us when building Zapier apps with the command line interface. So a lot of the code Zapier is actually going to write for us, and we're only going to need to make some small tweaks, which I'll talk about. So we're going to install Zapier, our platform CLI here.
My little no-code brain is already impressed that you can install stuff from VS Code.
Yeah. So it's installing all the packages so that when we use the Zapier shortcuts, the shortcuts that Zapier provides, like our computer is like, oh, I know what it means. Otherwise, if we did some of the commands, it'd be like, what's this? Like, what's Zapier? So, and then next thing we do is we just log into our account. I can actually zoom in a little bit more so it's
brilliant. Yeah.
Very big. So we'll do Zapier login, and you're going to use your login information. Looks like I can use my demo account here. And then I'll put in my password, which I have over here separately. Keep that nice and secret.
Yeah. Oh, great. Well done.
Cool. And then we're logged in to Zapier. Basically, what this does is now it knows that who's actually making this integration. And when we push it, it'll be able to put it into our Zapier apps. Then we're going to basically spin up a new template for a Zapier app using Zapier's init command. This is going to give us a lot of, like I said previously, boilerplate, so we don't have to do a ton of coding and making things from scratch. The Zapier integration we're going to do is like a Postman collections trigger app, which I'll talk a little bit more about, but just as a basic example of how to make a Zapier app. So let's go here.
And just for those who don't know, can you quickly, briefly explain what Postman does?
Oh yeah, that's a great point. So Postman is primarily a developer tool for building and managing APIs. So if you wanted to actually create an API, Postman can help you do that. And they have this thing called collections where you can kind of store all the information about APIs. Postman does not currently have a Zapier integration, so we can quickly build one so we can watch information for new collections, as an example.
Easy peasy.
Yeah. Hopefully. We'll call this Postman Zapier collection. This is just gonna be the name of the folder. We'll be able to change the name of the integration and the description when we actually push it to Zapier. And then it helps us out with, we can choose some templates. We have a list of templates that we can choose from that will determine what boilerplate code we get. We're just going to do the minimal template for our example here. And we have it created. So next up is we're going to go to that folder that we just created using the cd command here. Collection. We're going to install all of the dependencies. So previously we installed Zapier. Now we're installing all of the packages that come with the template when we did our Zapier init command. So we'll do that. It'll take some time to load. And then for VS Code users in particular, we can reload it so that we can open this up. So when we ran our Postman, our Zapier init command, it basically created all these files for us. We didn't have to do anything. Gave us all the packages, zoom out a little bit, gave us an example test file, gave us the index.js, as we build an app and we add triggers and searches, just as you would on if we were just going through the UI.
Mm-hmm.
It already spinned up the template for that so that we can just add those things here as we need them. And then our next step here, so we've kind of initialized our repository. We've got all the kind of boilerplate here for our Postman Zapier collection Zapier app. What we're going to do is whenever we create a new collection in Postman, we want it to trigger our workflows in Zapier. And so for that, the main action or main thing that we're going to have here is called a Zapier trigger. And Zapier provides a command for us to spin up a new trigger. So we just have to type in here Zapier scaffold trigger, and then the name of the trigger, whatever we want to name the trigger. If we were triggering new records, we could call it record. If it was new messages, we would call it messages. But for collections, we can just call it collection.
Mm-hmm. That's really kind of them that they're
Yes,
offering this. Where
exactly.
would that be? Where do you find all these commands? Commands, are they in the documentation or?
Yes, that is a wonderful, wonderful question. So let's actually go here. So they're in the documentation. Definitely Zapier's documentation. This is the detailed documentation, and it's on GitHub, and it has all of the commands, even the getting started that we just went through. That's covered here. So it's nothing that you have to remember. It's the installing the platform here in the commands.
Nice. We love a good documentation, don't we?
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely something that you don't have to remember or know off the top of your head. So
Right.
The documentation is a really great resource.
Mm-hmm.
Really great resource. So back to our command. So we're gonna Zapier scaffold trigger collection. Zapier is nice. They give us this command so we can spin up the boilerplate code for creating a new trigger. And when we did that, we got a couple of new files and folders. So first, we have this new triggers folder, wasn't there before. It has the collection.js with the code that we need that we'll modify to make work with our Postman API. Then in tests, it also spinned up a new folder for testing our triggers. There's a command that we'll use later called Zapier test. And that, while we're developing here, will enable us to try out our code before we push it to the platform. So we don't have to be in Zapier's UI making a bunch of workflows to make sure that our code works. So we've got that there. And in our index.js, before triggers was completely empty, if you remember. Now triggers has the collection already paired to it. So the command did quite a bit for us, which was really, really, really nice. Then the next piece that we will check out, and also I mentioned Zapier test. We can just run that. It should pass the test because we haven't done much of anything, but here's an example. We'll run more tests later. But yeah,
That's the beauty of live streams. There's always something, that just hides behind the corner. You never know. There's
yeah.
always a moment where people, our guests have to do a little troubleshooting, which is quite entertaining.
Yeah, so not to say that we won't run into any troubles later.
Exactly.
But yes, we initialized it. We added a trigger. Everything in our code right now seems to be working. So we can move on to the next part, which is going to be something called authentication. So when you are working with external services, you're building a Zapier app, you'll want to make sure that you authenticate, which means like verify like the users with that service or API. And Zapier provides some tools for doing that. So in our index.js, we can start building it out. We're gonna put some code here, but a lot of the structure actually comes straight from the documentation. So if we look at, they have like an authentication block that you can pretty much follow. So for authenticating an API, we're pretty much doing this here. We're having our authentication block. We'll have a test, add API key to header. So we can actually, for ease sake, copy a lot of this straight from the documentation and put it in, and then we can modify what's going on here. So API keys, that's going to be custom, the custom type. Sometimes you'll be working with services where you'll do like an OAuth 2, which is another integrate or authentication type, or basic auth, but we're just doing custom. And then here for the fields, we don't need subdomain. We can just do key, API key, then like the label, which is what the user will see. So the key is kind of an internal for us, like, oh, when we are referencing in this in our code, we'll reference API key. But for our user, we don't necessarily, we want it to be something more user looking friendly, more human readable. So we can just put API key here. It's going to be required. It's also going to be a string. It helps us with when we copied this block, we had the found on your settings, a little help text as well. But this is going to be that like field that users see when they are asked to connect to Postman from our Zapier app. And we'll see this when we like try it out. So it'll be a little less esoteric here.
Mm. And to that point, if anyone here has got any questions at any, time, feel free to drop them in the chat. We have a Q&A at the end of the presentation, but, if you have a burning question throughout the presentation now, feel free to drop it in the chat, and I can ask our lovely Lola.
Yeah, for sure. And then I'm actually going to do like a constant here and do another have like a sort of test section, which is also very helpful for when we are building our authentication. It's one thing for users to give us their API keys. We want to make sure that it's actually the right credential. Otherwise, we could have Zapier apps running and they're not actually accessing any new information because they didn't connect correctly. And that's what this test piece is going to be about. And so we're going to use some of the Z bundle, which bundle is where Zapier stores information like the API key, and our triggers, if we had inputs, it would store that there. And then a lot of our requests to APIs or commands, we can prefix them with Z, and that, especially with like things like console log errors, if we like do like Z console, when we run our logs, we can see anytime our Zapier app runs from our terminal here, like what the results of those logs were. So we're just gonna quickly do this. I would say the authentication piece is probably the most code heavy for this demo. So we'll get to
Show me the pretty things.
territory soon. So.
No, this is really cool. And actually, VS Code is one of the least intimidating, I guess, writing, programming programs. I don't know. I don't even know how to call them that I've seen. Like, I've tried a little bit of Angular in my past life, and VS Code was the one tool recommended. So it looks familiar and friendly so far.
Nice. Yeah. And luckily, Zapier does a lot for us. So we're not starting from a super blank slate.
Yeah.
So for testing our API, a lot of APIs will have kind of like a me endpoint that's helpful for just verifying that, hey, this API key is connected to a user on our platform. So we shall do that. And this, in terms of getting the endpoints for APIs, that's going to come straight from their API documentation. This comes straight from Postman's documentation.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just, we have the URL, but we haven't actually added the API key to it yet. So to our headers and like how you actually authorize with a service, that's also going to come from their documentation as well. And so we've got just like an X API key. We're going to use that bundle that I had mentioned earlier. So bundle.
I wonder if people are trying to follow along. I'm trying to follow along here.
Oh, nice. Oh, great. Yes. Yeah, definitely let me know if you want to pause, if you need me to pause or slow down. But yeah.
All good. Yeah, Marcus says Lola makes it all look so easy, right? I told you she was great.
I mean, I have looked at this documentation before, so that makes it look easier than if this were like my very first time around. But so we have this test here, and then we also want to just, we'll do one thing if it's actually successful. We'll get the username. And then if it's not successful, we want to give the user like a warning, like, hey, that API key is not an API key that will work for what you're trying to do here. So we're just going to finish out this, this code. Response and put this. So if the response is successful, and we actually got some cool thing about VS Code, will also give you some autocomplete sometimes. So response code equals 200. That's just 200 status typically means that everything was good. It was successful. Then we want to get the username from the API key because we're going to use that for something called a connection label, which is required from Zapier. And I will explain connection label in just a moment. But we use this Z instead of just like JSON parse. And make sure this is
200 is API speak for bet.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. That sounds even cooler than what I was saying. So yes, it's bet it works. And then, yeah, here I'm just getting the username from the data. So
is 400 the error one?
Yeah. So errors can have a ton of different ones. 400s could be one. I think 401 is like does not exist. But basically what we'll do is we only care if it's successful. If it's some other error, like, oh, you don't have any funds or I don't know, something else, like we'll throw an error to the user. So I'll show I think there's some resources on error codes, like if I Google
Yeah,
codes.
I was trying to remember from the API course that we did with 9x.
Oh, nice. Okay, yeah. An API course, taking that too will be very helpful if you're out here
Absolutely.
building Zapier apps. So data, user, username, and then we want to like return that. So make that accessible because we're going to use that later. Name.username. And let's see what else here. Then if it doesn't work, we'll just throw an error that says we could throw errors. That's like, hey, this API key is not valid. And then we'll add the status just so any information that we're getting from like Postman about it, it will let us know that like why it's not valid. All right, so no, we've got that piece constant test. Then we can add that. Well, now it's a part of our authentication. So we've got this custom authentication. We have when somebody gives us an API key, we should test it. And then our last piece is adding the API key to all of our other calls. So in a typical Zapier app, you might have multiple triggers calling different endpoints, multiple actions, creating things in your software. And you want to make sure that the API key that was given is included in all of those requests. Otherwise, the software will be, the API or app you're integrating into will be like, who's this? This is a random request, and I don't know who it is.
Mm-hmm. And we don't talk to strangers.
We don't talk to strangers. Apps, a lot of times for security purposes, they do not talk to strangers. So for that piece, we're actually going to modify this slightly. I'm going to take actually most of this out. And then we'll just say like, hey, if the bundle, if the API key is there, we can, then we'll add the right headers to our requests. And in our module exports, we're going to add it to every before request. So before every request. So we just do this once in our code, then we don't have to worry about doing it again.
We have a question from LinkedIn that I can actually read, so keep them coming. Speaking of API, LinkedIn doesn't really share great APIs with streaming platforms, so every now and then I'm not able to see your comments, but right now it seems to be working, so this is your chance. Supal Saini says, fantastic walkthrough, Lola. How long does it take for Zapier to review the app once it's built?
Ooh, so that can vary. I actually don't have a good answer on the top of my head, especially if you're doing like a public integration. For a private app, you can use it automatically. You also get a link that you can use to like beta test while it's in review, where anybody who has the link or accesses the link can also add the Zap to their requests. I think their publishing rules are in, if we go to like Zapier platform, their review, I think the timeline is potentially in there. I think the publishing requirements. Yeah. So short answer, I don't know exactly how, I think the time varies. I don't have off the top of my head how long they always take.
I guess they'll have to go through some sort of checks and security and all that, kind of similar to what Google does when you upload a new app.
Yeah. So like I said, you can use it immediately. You can share with people immediately. I think what Suka's mentioning is like if you want to build a public integration for like Zapier users, like how long does it take for them to review it and make it public? But I think I remember it being fairly quick. But that's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
Internal apps, immediately we'll push to the thing. If you want it to be on the marketplace, they review those. Great. So we have our API key to header here. I think this is all of our code. And then we'll just add to our module exports the authentication. Well, actually, last piece here. So we've got the test. And we also want to do the connection label, which is required by Zapier. If you remember, kind of like up above, we went through all this process of getting a username just so when they connect, it can say, hey, this connection is for this username account.
Oh, okay. Is it like a sort of ID kind of
Yeah.
thing? Yeah.
Just in case if you're connecting to a service where you might have multiple accounts, example, Gmail. I have so many Gmail accounts. I want to know if I'm connecting to Gmail to send an email, like I want to know
Which one you're sending it from, not from,
Rent's
some
like surprise blast.
like I used to have an Avril Lavigne when I was a fangirl back when I was 16. So I used to have an Avril Lavigne account, Gmail. You definitely do not want to use that for professional emails.
For sure, for sure. So we added that connection label piece. So this basically tells like, hey, what should the format of the connection label be? And we could do anything. We could say, I think Zapier rules are typically you don't like put the name within like the connection because that's like a little duplicative, but of like the service, like we wouldn't say like your Postman account, but we can do things like usernames. And the last piece here before we can actually set up our test modify to test our authentication is to add like a before request. So this is while we just defined how we want to add API key to header, like this command here, which is in Zapier's documentation, is how we're actually gonna add the API key to header. It's basically a command that's like, hey, before every request, we're gonna do this. So we have to put it in our module exports to header. Awesome. So that is this for the authentication, kind of the heavier code piece. Now we can go ahead and test it out. For this, we're going to create an environment variable just for our local testing purposes. If you're not familiar, environment variables or .env files are just ways to put secrets outside of your actual code because you don't want to put any API keys, even if you're testing directly in your code. That's not secure. You don't want anyone impersonating you. So for that, we just have.
It's good. It's good that you're sharing some best practices as well, because that I didn't know that. For example, do not put an API key into your code. I just assumed, that was safe, but clearly not. So, is it like a sort of sandbox, for example? Like you just practice, you test things out?
Yeah, so it's really just a file where you'll define any secrets. So like for us to test actually whether our authentication works, we're gonna have to supply an API key. We could try like maybe connecting and not run a test in the Zapier in our code right now. But it's more streamlined to like test it here. So yeah, it's just a place to list like secrets, passwords, API keys, things that shouldn't be public.
Right.
So I'm gonna actually expose my API key, but I'm gonna rotate it. So in real life, you really should keep API.
I can stop sharing if you want, or take
Oh,
it.
that's okay. That's okay. I'm gonna cancel it. So it's cool. It's cool for this live stream for right now. So cool. So we have our API.
Yeah, we like to think that we have only good people watching this right now.
I mean, there's not too much interesting stuff because it's a demo account, so nothing too exotic or interesting that you can put in the API key, except for Lola's test collection. Cool. So then we are going to go into our test, so we can run Zapier test and have it test our authentication. But we need to make some changes here. We have this bundle input data, but we do not. We need to also add like our auth data. So, because right now this says nothing about our API keys. So we have to add it here. And .api key. And basically what I'm saying is from that super secret file that's, not going to be committed to, like if I shared this on GitHub, for example, m.env file is not going to be there if it's not in my git ignore, or if it is in my git ignore. So all to say, basically the secret API key, we can access it without actually putting it directly in our code here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that piece. And then we just have to create a test as well for the authentication piece. For this, we can copy our trigger because it's going to be very similar. And we can call our test authentication.test.js. And
does all this come from your, like, did you have to learn this throughout your journey of just having to build more complex things, or were you just very curious and you picked up a coding course, or just
oh yeah, in terms of just coding in general,
like I'm so fascinated right now. I'm like, this is
yeah.
amazing.
Oh yeah, so mostly came from having to, doing no code, and then some curiosity of wanting to.
Running into limits probably, because that's what always happens. Like you no code, and then there's something really complex you want to do, and you have to reach out to your developer friends.
Exactly. Wanted to do a little more. And I think also with the tools that we have now, there's autocomplete. There are AI tools to help you generate code. If you want to dip your toes into it, I think it's a lot easier than it was when I was first trying to learn how to code. And I was like, what is this? 2 years. So exactly. Cool. So I copied that code from the trigger template, and I changed the path a little bit since it's not in a folder. We don't need those 2 dots. And we just will change a few things. Like our test is not to trigger collections. It's for custom auth, and, describing the test, passes authentication, and, turns JSON, just put some words there. And for our app tester, we're not testing our trigger and the perform operation. What we are testing is, we'll change this to our authentication, which will take our authentication block, test, and app tester, we don't need this. Authentication test, bundle, we don't need that either. Bundle, let's see. Actually, bundle. We have 2 bundles here. We don't need this, or really this either. All right, and this should give us all that we need. So we did a lot of coding. Hopefully, Zapier tests. Hopefully, Zapier tests will say that we did things correctly. But this will run we wrote our tests. It will run it, make sure that our authentication, all of that. Oh, let's see. Looks when I did. Oh yes, because I app authentication.test. Await app tester authentication.test bundle. Let's see. I do have
what was the error there?
Yeah. It failed.
Of course. Dun dun dun.
Oh, yes, I've been doing reading test. Oh no. Not read properties of undefined. Reading test. Expect results. because I did authentication dot test. So I wonder, I guess in our authentication here, we do have a version of this. Let's see if we authentication.test. If we go to our index.js. Let's see. Oh, I didn't even add the authentication to our module exports. So it's like, what am I even talking about?
So, because the authentication was missing, obviously it couldn't find it, and that's where the error comes from.
Exactly. So so this is our app, and if we look at our code here, I'm saying like what I want you to, it's looking for at the module exports. I want you to go to the authentication piece and run test, but I add it to the module exports. So it was like, there's nothing here. There's no authentication test, but now it should run. So let's try it out. Oh no, something else failed. There are new Z errors. So something with my authentication here, with how I put the errors. All of the fun of doing it live.
Yeah, of course. I told you, it's just magic. Something happens every time.
Yeah. Let's look at this here.
But it's even better because I always think these are like learning opportunities, and so we're learning together.
So it is at this, the errors, we added our error, invalid API key. Our new Z errors, error, not API key. So let's copy this C bundle. Let's see if this helps us any. We could put 2 errors here. Let's see. Okay, so it was a syntax error or an error that I had with my errors previously. I think I had an S. So wrong thing with the response. But now it has run and all of our tests have passed.
Yeah, cool.
Awesome. Okay, so that was a bit on authentication with a little detour. Detour. I don't know if you did the little boom or if I.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Little detour. Sometimes we have detours. And then we can do the collection piece, which is going to be a bit more straightforward. So here we're just going to modify our perform block. This is, so Zapier, when you make a Zapier app, Zapier trigger, every 1 to 15 minutes, Zapier is going to kind of run this to pull and check what's new in your API. And this perform is basically checking, like telling you what to check. So to speed things up here, so I'm gonna check the Postman API, postman.com/collections. And then I'm also gonna add a method for get. Because we had that before request, we don't have to add like authentication. Typically we'd have to say like, oh, add the API key, but we already did that. So it should be good. We don't need these parameters. Then we can do like just for the response here. Add a piece to save that, oh, we got like new collections, because we're going to use that information. This is almost there. Return, do response collections. And then we'll just do a little catch here for errors. which will almost be totally done with this. We could do like the Z, and then this is where we could like add like that Z console. This should be a dot. That's going to give us a problem. The Z console, where it's like, if we ran Zapier logs for all live runs, we'd be able to see like this message. So we'll do it for fun.
Why not? Why not?
Why not?
How many times have you done this before? It seemed like you know everything by heart.
Well, I wrote a tutorial on this particular thing, so not too terribly. I've only been in Zapier apps for a few, so not too terribly many. I am referencing, I have multiple screens on, so I have.
Oh, I see. Okay, cool. I was like, how can she possibly remember all these things?
Encyclopedia of like random Zapier commands.
Lolapedia.
I know, a Lolapedia. Cool. Zapier, and then let's here, then like we'll throw a new Zapier, and then we'll say like, oh, failed to get collections. Collections. Put this in here. Then we don't need this. I'm doing something weird. I think I've got something here. Let's see. So response data collections. All right. So here's the formatted triggers on a new collection. So we have our perform. It's gonna do the collections, pull collections, check for any new ones. And that's really the biggest piece of building the trigger. The only last piece here before we actually push it to Zapier, do a Zapier test and then push it to Zapier, is giving it a sample of the output that we expect. So this is required, just like what can it expect from doing this perform, so that it's able to let users kind of use that information in subsequent steps. I already kind of have this here, so I'm not gonna type it all out, but this is also going to come from your API documentation. So where check out your API documentation, we'll typically have a place of like the output and the response. And then you can put a sample example just to give Zapier some knowledge. Then we won't use any of the other pieces here, and we can test it. We can test it and see if it gives us any issues. Ready, set up our test. Will we get a, we got a first time for this one.
Well done.
Yeah, okay. And now we can register it, and then we can push it to Zapier. So those are the last steps. If you haven't built a Zapier app, like if the app you're building isn't on Zapier yet, you'll first do Zapier register. Otherwise, when you make updates in your code, you can just do Zapier push. So what is the title of your integration? We'll call it like Postman to Zapier. Watch for new collections. I can even zoom in here. Watch for new collections. Basically just asks you like information about the kind of app you're building. So if you say public, it's going to have to go through Zapier's review before it becomes live. Private, you can start kind of using it right away. Then it has a piece about relationship. One thing about public Zapier apps is you can only publish on the App Store if you are working with the company. So if I wanted to like publish a new LinkedIn Zapier app because I wanted to do something different, I could only do so if I was like a person of LinkedIn. You can't kind of build on behalf as like a third party if you have no affiliation with that. So I'll just say I have no affiliation. And then there's categories. We'll say this is developer tools, subscribe to updates. Cool, it is registering. Another command we have to make sure that, cool, so we've got some warnings just on our Zapier validate is different than Zapier test, but it kind of gives you some more like UX suggestions. So I ran Zapier validate before pushing. it told me that in my authentication here, we go back to the index.js, I gave them help text and I was like, oh, go find your API key on your settings page. That's not really helpful information because like, okay, I have to find my settings page. So it's telling me like, oh, you should put a direct link. But
Oh, okay. So kind of like what you were saying, UX user experience, giving you suggestions, so you don't have to go and change it necessarily. It's just telling you like you could do this better.
exactly. So for errors, as I say here, you won't be able to push to the platform at all if it's an error. Warnings are, yeah, you can still push to a platform, but they're helpful to resolve, especially if you're going to build a public app. So we can do Zapier push, copying our app, Zapier
Nice.
pushing to the platform. It's pushed. We coded it. And then
Woohoo!
let's see if it's so we coded it with
We coded an app in, well, we had some errors, otherwise it would have been like 40 minutes.
yeah, little error in the middle, but and then if you go, so previously I had no apps in this account. Now there's a Postman to Zapier, which came from our CLI. And then if we like, click on it, we can see some information, analytics about our app, monitoring. It has the warnings as well. So it'll tell us here like, hey, like you should do this API key thing. Then it'll also tell us to like verify like date time format, which if you're using date time, this error is going to be there until you actually run a live Zap, and then it'll resolve itself. We'll be like, oh, okay, cool. It's actually in a live Zap, it's the right date time format. And in Zapier, if we create a Zap, we'll also be able to add the thing that we just made. So we got this.
Oh, that's really cool. It's really cool to see what you just created, just, magically come into the Zapier interface.
Exactly. It's there. That trigger that we made, it's there. Now we have the account. So that the information that we put, like API key, the label, and our help text from our account, I can do some more, put it in my API key for fun. Connect to Postman, which might take some time. Oh no, something happened there. Probably I gave it the wrong API key. Oh
Should I
yeah.
stop streaming?
Oh,
I mean, should I stop sharing your screen for you to put the right one, or?
oh, that's okay. I put the wrong one. Yeah, let me do that again. Hold on. Let me do that again. Please reconnect
I'll
it here.
just hide it for now. I don't know. I just feel more secure. You do your thing. You do your thing, and don't tell me. But everyone that's been watching up until now, I can see we still have about 30 people watching. What do y'all think? Are you following along? Is this the first time you see anything like this? Yeah, I would love to hear if you have any questions. Of course, we have a few for our Q&A. If you have time, Lola, we can have an extra 5 minutes. But yeah, I would love to hear how's this journey been for you so far. I definitely want to have Lola just like here next to me every day and teach me 5 minutes of code every day.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to answer like any questions. Still looking for my
Yeah, don't worry.
But yeah, while I'm actually getting the right API key, happy to answer any questions.
I've never used the CLI. Too intimidating, but we'll definitely give it a try next time. I can see how it could be much faster.
Yeah, I think it can be like intimidating to start. One thing that I also didn't mention is that when you can actually start with like the platform CLI or the platform UI and then switch to the CLI. So you don't necessarily, you can, if you wanted to even play with this and kind of first start with like the visual approach and then kind of transition it to like the code approach, you can and see how those set up.
And actually, Lola was mentioning a blog, a step-by-step guide, right? So am I okay to share that with the
Oh
audience?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, there's a step-by-step guide, a little bit more in depth with some other pieces. One thing that you really have to keep in mind, especially when building Zapier app integrations, is like the API limits of those APIs. So because Zapier is by default gonna call that API once every 15 minutes, and sometimes you won't need to do that so often. So that deals with that. For Postman in particular, I think the free plan only has like 1,000 API calls per month. So if you do like enable this, definitely check out the full thing so you don't just blow through all of your API calls. But yeah, that's pretty.
Absolutely. And I highly recommend, once you check out the blog post, because, everyone's got different styles of learning and following things. So it's even so great, Lola, that you offer kind of like a written step-by-step guide. You're here giving out this webinar. Like, you're so inspiring for real. And I highly recommend subscribing to Lola's newsletter. Again, as I said to you before, I have many, many newsletters coming into my inbox every day, every week, and Lola is the one that I do not want to miss. So go ahead and subscribe.
Yes, definitely. Super happy to be here.
Alrighty, did we make it into the Zapier?
Oh yeah, I had copied I'm still even working on my little API key here. So hold on one second.
No worries.
My keys. And then we can actually do this. The joy of some multitasking.
I can imagine she's got like 1,000 monitors and tabs everywhere. Let me see. I do have some questions if you would like to add an extra task to your multitasking.
Let's do it.
Why not?
I'm happy to
Juggling.
answer question.
I love it. I love it that we're jugglers here. Alrighty, let me check. What's a question from Alexandra? What's the most common task that you use custom Zapier apps for?
That's a really, really great question. So I don't like internally like use a ton of custom Zapier apps. It's more something that if a company wants to integrate into the ecosystem. But I think they're most useful for places where you're working with a piece of software that's not yet on Zapier, like Zapier. Like that's going to be like I think the biggest use case for it. If you want to integrate with like Gmail or LinkedIn or an app that already has like a has a Zapier app, you won't so much need a custom Zapier app. But if you're using like an internal system that doesn't have one, that's going to be the biggest use case. And also kind of like, as I mentioned sort of in the beginning, there are other different ways to extend your Zapier workflows with code outside of like Zapier apps. So if you have, you can use like the code step, especially if it's more of a one-off. Zapier apps are best suited if there's like an app that you're going to continually need in several workflows. And so you have to, and it's not on Zapier yet.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And we have a question from Eric who's here watching the live stream as well. So I'm just pulling it from the form. Sometimes an API call will require information retrieved from another API call. When this is the case, is it possible to combine multiple API calls into one action for my custom Zapier application?
Yes, you absolutely can. So with and that's one of the benefits too of particularly using like the CLI. Like if you want to do some more transformation to data before defining what comes out to Zapier, if you want to get some do another API call, those are things that you're able to do. Because really all you have to define to Zapier is like, what are the output fields? What does like the sample data look like that they can expect? How to authenticate with the service, and then kind of like going from there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really great question. And reason why you might choose like the CLI over the platform UI.
Yeah, I hope that helps, Eric. I needed a tutor just to understand that question. Awesome. Alrighty. I don't see any more questions coming through. It does. Thank you. Awesome. Glad that it was helpful, Eric.
Nice. Let's reconnect it. Very cool. Then awesome. So, guess we're like a few minutes over
Yeah.
one piece. By just doing my little piece here. So
You're learning. Lots of people came here up today to just get some knowledge, out of this. I am just looking through the forum and I can see Tilly. She says, "I'm looking forward to learning from you." Um, Rachel, still learning, want to take the information on. Really great. So again, I hope this was a little masterclass into coding and custom Zapier and all that. So really, really helpful. Once again, if you would like to connect with Lola, I'm just going to share her profile here again. Lola, which one do you prefer, LinkedIn, or do you have another favorite social media?
LinkedIn is good. LinkedIn or Twitter, and then finally have the API key actually in there, so we can do
Awesome.
final piece on showing that app, and then LinkedIn
Let's
is
end
good.
on a high.
Yeah, let's end on a high. LinkedIn is good, and also like the blog post too has all of the code plus some extra that we shared. So if you want to learn from that resource, you can. So I can share my screen.
There you go.
Awesome. Share my screen so we can connect an account. And so, yes, continue. And it's connected, and it gives my username because that's what we put as the connection label. So continue. Now I can test our trigger. And it is getting the records that are currently in my personal Postman account.
Really cool.
With some fun, live demo fun. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. Again, we've been looking into Postman. We've had a whole series of APIs for no coders. But yeah, I feel like he just compacted everything that we've done last year and threw it into 60 minutes masterclass. So thank you so much, for being here, sharing your knowledge, being an awesome member, of the no code global community, and most importantly of our NoCodeOps community as well.
Awesome. Yeah. Super happy to be here, and really, thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. And I hope, we'll see a bit more of you in the future as well.
Definitely.
Definitely when I come down to Atlanta, when I come to the office,
Yeah,
that's our ritual. We have to get a coffee.
absolutely. If you're ever in Atlanta, feel free to come join me for sure.
Absolutely. And so, folks, that will be all for today. If you liked this content today, do hit like and subscribe. It helps our community grow. And next week, next Thursday, we'll be looking into database design for operators with Alex from 9x. So tune in. I'm gonna announce the event tomorrow. And so, yeah, stay tuned. Thank you so much again, Lola. You've been amazing, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.
Awesome. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Awesome. Great.
Bye bye. Bye, everyone.